Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 10th of February 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, deep behind the technical desk, is Mike Robinson. And we're going to be joined by live video Skype link by Alex Thompson from Eastern Approaches. Well, the weather, pretty gruesome in Plymouth. Grey, showers, cold. Yes, we'll leave it there. Sunny in Pembrokeshire, and understand it's a bit grey and overcast in Holland. Do we need to say more about the weather? If you find it depressing, it's the person up there trying to tell us that the EU is not a good thing. So when we get out of the EU, UK column promises the weather will improve. Well, is the press telling the truth? Do they need regulation? Lots of things starting to happen behind the scenes to do with control of the press. Mike?
The argument about it seems to be pretty much in stalemate at the moment, but nonetheless, IPSO, which is the Independent Press Standards Organisation, has agreed funding for the next 4 years. So perhaps the deal is done for the next 4 years at least. Sir Alan Moses, who's the chairman, has said that the agreement guarantees £2.8 million a year and will increase in line with inflation. And they are receiving this money via the body that they have put together, which is this one, the Regulatory Funding Company, which is staffed by people drawn from the newspapers that have signed up to IPSO, and they pay for its operation. And this is obviously following the Leveson inquiry. So there is a rival regulator, which many of the sort of pro-hacking inquiry, common purpose-y type newspapers are saying is backed by legislation, and that's called Impress. But at this point in time, none of the UK newspapers have actually signed up to that. So most of them have signed up to IPSO. That's the one that seems to be in place for the next few years at least. So as I say, Brian, perhaps this is, in the meantime, a stalemate, perhaps is the best way to describe it.
Well, it seems that way to me, Mike. I'm going to be pretty bullish here and say that it was due to the efforts of the UK column and all our supporters who contributed to the knowledge that allowed us to expose what Leveson was doing and what Sir David Bell was doing with the Common Purpose Cabal. Still my view that the whole of the Leveson inquiry was an attempt at a state clampdown of the press and media here in Britain. And if the Daily Mail in particular had not run such an explosive expose of what Common Purpose was doing, I think we would already be in a situation of total state-controlled press. And of course, that would have made any debate over the European Union referendum, for example, particularly difficult. And just in answer to those people who say, well, of course, the press and media are completely controlled, I'm going to say I disagree. The control is over the editorial boards. And you can see that journalists, and many of them are, of course, self-employed journalists, are not giving in to the control and are also becoming more suspicious as that level of control comes in. So I believe that we've got to continue to work with journalists who show that they are still thinking and they are brave enough to speak out on hot topics. Perhaps we should bring in Alex from the Netherlands and just see what he thinks about the Leveson effort to take control of the press. Alex, have we got you?
You have, Mike, yes. Leveson, it was only 2.5 years after I emigrated to the Netherlands that Leveson held his hearings in 2012. And if I'm not wrong, he produced his report in 2013. But that was really a jaw-dropping moment for me. I was in the kind of office in the Netherlands where you can plug your headphones in during the day, so I did and had a listen. And I could not recognise the 2012 Britain that would hold such a thing as this sham inquiry compared with even the 2009 Britain that I left. There really been an incremental change in how the public authorities team together to attack the public institutions. So as for individual journalists telling the truth, I can recommend one name right now, which is Oliver Lane, He's on social media as Oliver J. Lane. Those are his middle initials. He writes, I think, on a freelance basis for Breitbart and has a particular focus on continental news. So he's a kind of equivalent of me. Just got talking to him yesterday. A very solid chap. There are quite a few left, and a lot of them are under 40.
Okay, well, that is very good to hear. Well, having defended some journalists, I think it's time to give others quite a hard prod with a very sharp stick. And we'll start off with The Guardian. Now, a number of people flagged up this article. It's by a lady called Zoe Williams. And she said, how do we work out who to believe on child sex abuse? And what people thought about this article was that essentially she was trying to protect abusers. Now, I've spent a lot of time reading this article, and I think there's something rather different going on. But these are some of the comments. She is basically saying that it was a coincidence, but some abuse victims came to her, and when they started to tell her their stories, initially she didn't believe it. So this is one of the paragraphs. My first response was disbelief in the child abuse. Who would have a child in order to sexually abuse it? What possible interruption of human instinct would have to occur for that to be possible? Yet my incredulity is driven by what I need to believe of other people, of the species. It has nothing to do with that woman or her case. Often the failure to hear these claims dispassionately has an element of group narcissism, in which it's more important to maintain a collective delusion than it is to discover the truth. Now, I thought there was some substance in this, because the lady is saying the story is essentially so horrible, you just don't want to go near it. You'd rather stay away from it. But then she goes on and says in 2013, when Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecution, he revolutionised the way in which sex crimes were approached by asking a series of simple questions. Now, she listed those questions. I've cut them out in the excerpt here, but she lists the questions, but she doesn't give any answers to the questions, so it leads you into no man's land. And then she goes on, she says, what do we ask of victims before we will take them seriously? And to all those requirements, in the case of children, are we asking that the crime perpetrated against them should not be too grotesque before we consider its veracity? And if we're raising all these hurdles to justice, are we excluding those who deserve and need it? Both the accuser and the accused would be better served if we could reach some new normal in which our need to believe in human goodness came second to the pursuit of justice. Now, I've highlighted this business of reaching some new normal because we've been pretty good at working out right and wrong and justice over many, many years. So what sort of new normal is she after? And I just wanted to add a bit, if I may there, Mike. Just take a look at some of these journalists who come out with these very vague articles. There's no proper research. There's no proper statement. This is a Twitter page. I took time out of my busy drinking schedule to rejoice in Justin Bieber. So what is the quality of this journalist? Is she trying to protect abusers? I don't think so. I think this woman is sitting in a fluffy bubble where she doesn't want to go near what the child victims are saying because it's simply too grotesque, as she says, and she can't handle it. So what do? You write a rather waffly piece on it. But if I come on to, so I'm going to say cognitive dissonance. She doesn't know where she is on this subject. But then look at the Telegraph, and we've got here, no one is safe from prosecutors' terrifying incompetence on sex crimes. And this is a remarkable story, apparently about the gentleman ringed in the picture, Mark Pearson, who was accused of seriously sexually assaulting an actress, who of course is unnamed, on a train or at a train station. There was no evidence. The video showed that he didn't do anything to her, but he was hauled through the Crown prosecution system. So Julia Hartley Brewers, the journalist here, and she says the CPS has taken leave of its senses, no longer beyond all reasonable doubt. More and more people are now asking if the body charged with prosecuting offenders for their crimes is up to the job. And basically she attacks the CPS. But if you read through this article, what she's actually doing is promoting that the CPS changes. So this apparently extraordinary case where an innocent man can be seen to be innocent from the video clip is attacked, she writes an article. The whole aim of the article is to promote change of the CPS. And what she doesn't go near is the CPS's own documents, Crown Prosecution Service Improvement Plan. I'd just like to look at some of the language here, because here we are, the delivery of our long-term operating model enabled by streamlined digital processes together with inducing casework hubs to meet the challenges of our financial settlement. So this is about the privatisation of the CPS. They want change, and I'm going to say that Telegraph article seems to be promoting it. The CPS determines which cases should be prosecuted, prepares the charges, prepares the cases, and then down it goes, in better engaging our people through strengthening leadership skills. This is modern speak, all about change of the CPS. Alex, what do you, or Mike, what do you see in this?
Well, what I just wanted to say first, Brian, was that this tactic of undermining investigations into child sexual abuse, where, of course, many of the allegations have been made against high-level members of the establishment. This is exactly the same tactic that they used with Operation Ore. And if you remember, that list came over from the FBI, and it contained many names on that list from members of the high-level British establishment. And so what they then did was that they started to prosecute people that were clearly innocent. For example, I know of one case where a credit card was used to access a child pornography site, but the credit card had been stolen and had been cancelled before they had attempted to use it on the child pornography site. So the person who had cancelled his card a year before ended up having his door kicked in and his computer taken away and all the rest of it, eventually found innocent. Absolute, complete miscarriage of justice, all to undermine the entire investigation of Operation Ore. And this is the same type of tactic that's going on here, isn't it?
Exactly the same. And we can also add to that operation, your comment on Operation Ore, that of course several men committed suicide as a result of the hounding on them. So to dig into this, Alex, what do you see going on here? Are we digging too deep?
No, I think you have to dig at that level, Brian, to find out what's going on with a major public body. The DPP and the Crown Prosecution Service are quite a recent innovation in the law of England and Wales, and the CPS has had an inglorious history as an institution. For instance, there's Dame Barbara Mills. Is it the sister-in-law, or the actual sister, I think, of David Mills, husband of Tessa Jowell? If you go and look into Gordon Bowden's material, you'll see that Mills was investigated and pronounced free of any wrongdoing in that Italian mafia money scandal while Mills was at the helm. A number of things have happened with the CPS which are quite eye-watering. Starmer, for example, walked straight out of the CPS job to become the Labour Member of Parliament for Holborn and St Pancras. Now, some UK column viewers would say, oh, stop picking on Labour, but the fact that he went to be an MP at all, in a party political sense, straight after being the Director of Public Prosecutions, raises eyebrows, especially as he was named after Keir Hardie by his parents, the founder of Christian socialism and almost a Fabian style of thinking. I'm looking here also, and I've pasted it in the chat room, at a Daily Mail report from July 2014 entitled Stephen Fry Stuns Labour Gala, with Miliband present. Miliband was then the Labour Party leader and leader of the opposition. Fry, for reasons that will be clear to some of us, laid into Keir Starmer, this is the current DPP's predecessor, for having successfully prosecuted some pederasts under Operation U-Tree. And I see here that he went particularly for Starmer and tried to invoke Magna Carta against public prosecutions. Ultimately, what this is all about, of course, is fusing Britain with the continent. Scotland's already halfway there, allegedly, with its mixed civil law, common law system. That itself is an innovation. And I think that we're going to end up, as we've intimated in previous editions of the UK column, with this push by the great and good to have French-style privacy and German-style reporting that John D has been prosecuted rather than John Doe 45, the public holder of office or whatever. So there'll be anonymity throughout. And of course, the crucial plank is removing private prosecutions. If you don't understand why England and Wales is unique in Europe with its private prosecutions not having been abolished by law there yet, then just go and look at the British Constitution Group's conference videos from spring this year, and you'll see what kinds of injustice private prosecution can overturn.
Okay, Alex, thank you for that. Well, I'm just going to add that if we got further into that document, the language, I think, is the giveaway. Here it is, what we do. This is the CPS mission. Our mission is to deliver justice through independent and effective prosecution of crime, fostering a culture of excellence, supporting and inspiring each other to do the best we can. This is all the transformational language of an organisation that is no longer doing its job. It's moving over the rainbow to the new utopia. And what's their priority is not to deliver justice. The number one here is to inspire our people. Well, it goes on, focus on quality. And we'll just remind you that this disgusting organisation was able to prosecute and continues to prosecute Melanie Shaw, child abuse victim. She gets no protection from Alison Saunders at all. It goes on and on and on. And what is Alison Saunders? Well, I believe she's a change agent. This is another change agent, Lynn Homer. Lynn Homer destroyed every organisation she was placed in. Once she'd done it, she was promoted. And we've got exactly the same thing happening with Alison Saunders. She's destroying the CPS from inside in order to bring in, Alex, as you said, a new form of justice in line with France, Germany and the European Union. And where has this come from? Well, this is a glimpse going back into 2010. Here is the government saying that there's going to be a new approach to the whole of public services. This was the Total Place initiative, setting a new direction for public services and local authorities, putting the citizen at the heart of service design. That is the lie. What was going on here is things were being destroyed. 11 pilot schemes across the country, and look at where it acted on: 63 local authorities, 34 primary care trusts, 12 fire, 13 police, and a wide range of third sector organisations. Never debated in Parliament, never discussed. And what was this designed to do? Well, this was to destroy the old before they could bring in the new, I'm going to say, quasi-European system. Would these people be that devious? Well, let's just remind ourselves about what the Conservatives seem to have been up to. So the report in The Guardian on the death of Conservative chairman from Witney, Christopher Shale, literally dead and buried, and that intrepid report talking about the role of David Cameron and other members of the Conservative Party with arms and nuclear weapons in South Africa. Well, they're capable of anything, certainly capable of destroying our economy, Mike. That's all right, I'll let you take it on.
Okay. Right, global trade. We've been talking about the Baltic Dry Index for quite a long time now, and it continues to be in a completely collapsed state, so more record low prices for transporting bulk dry materials, coal, iron ore, these types of things. So companies, a number of companies have now suspended payments to creditors because they are in such financial difficulties. They're seeking to restructure. They're seeking to sell off bits and pieces. And so we're talking. What are we talking about? Companies like Western Bulk, Norden, Jinhu Shipping, Mitsui, OSK Lines, Hyundai, Merchant Marine, and so on. Actually, if you remember the last time we discussed this, we were pointing out that the cost for hiring one of these ships, for one of the biggest ships, the Cape-sized ships, was falling around the $2,000-3,000 a day Well, actually, last Friday it was around $2,800 a day. Now we've since found out that it costs around $8,000 a day to run these ships. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the losses that some of these companies are suffering. So in the meantime, Maersk has come out and made a statement on this, and they're basically saying that the shipping companies are facing conditions which are significantly worse than 2008 at the end of the financial crash. And this is Niels Andersen from Maersk, and he's saying, he told the Financial Times it's worse than it was in 2008. The oil price is as low as its lowest point in 2008, 2009, and has stayed there for a long time. Doesn't look like going up soon. Freight rates are lower. The external conditions are much worse, but Maersk claims that they are prepared, and of course they're prepared because they've been laying people off and trying to make themselves more efficient and so on. He said that global trade conditions have been abnormal, and that imports to Europe, Britain, Russia, and West Africa in particular are all falling, and of course the oil price is the sort of main driver for this, according to him. But Alex, in desperation, it seems they're sending ships into ports which aren't really suited for them.
Yes, shipping is one of those areas of life that is day-to-day interest to the average Dutchman. A bit like cycle races. It's just household talk in the Netherlands, and nobody in Britain's ever heard of it. So the whole country has followed this article, or this plight of I think it's the Chinese main shipping line has got this mega vessel, the Indian Ocean. It's got a whole range of them in this class, 20,000 TEUs, that's container equivalents. The Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and Maersk, this Danish, I think it's now Swiss-based as well, even though Switzerland is not seafaring. The Danish player is the only European player in the market, Maersk, and they have likewise got these mega ships, totally unsuited to Northern European estuary waters, but all the ports, to the extent that we have any British ports, they're all of that type. Flushing, Antwerp, which is down a narrow river channel, the Scheldt. Hamburg, you have to sail up the Elbe. That's what happened here. These ships really are the only way of approaching an economic operation from Asia to Europe, because the crew-to-cargo ratio is lower. And the inevitable happens when this Indian Ocean was doing its tour of European harbours, and it ran on a sandbank, and Dutch specialist salvage unit, Smit, had to come from Rotterdam, and even they took, I think it was 3 days and nights to try to shift it. They had to use the tide and removing sand and all kinds of modalities. So the main point is, it's not just an amusing story. There is no way that shipping is economic in the current climate between Asia and Europe, and really that is hugely bad news, particularly for German exporters. I think we're going to see them turn vicious. One solution to this, of course, one you're keen on, Mike, is land bridges and strategic rail cargo to link Germany right through to its Asian markets overland. Britain could potentially benefit from that as well, but we're not investing in it.
No. Well, we'll pause on that. Big ships and narrow channels, always a dangerous thing. So thank you for that one. Well, if we change to another subject, which is war, which many of our national and world leaders seem to be very keen on, we've got the bizarre situation at the moment where the Americans have put climate change well into the military budget. What is this about, Alex?
It's about the capture of the Pentagon, and notice where it's come from. The Washington Times. People not so familiar with the US media might think that this is an established old paper. It isn't. The Washington Post is the DC version of the New York Times, the liberal established paper. The Washington Times was set up in, I think, 1982 by the Mooney Church, the unification church of the late Sun Myung Moon. And so people don't tend to take it seriously because of that, but it's the only non-culturally Marxist newspaper among the US broadsheets. And it takes this kind of isolated news reporter to spot that the Pentagon is actually being captured at the equivalent of 3-4-star general level, and certainly at headquarters at Pentagon, by these change agents, to use a very suitable term for them, who are ordering soldiers to take account of the environmental impact of their military operations, and indeed to scrap their current plans for the potential invasion of any country and redraw them based on climate considerations. This seems to me to be a ridiculous subterfuge and perhaps an undermining of national security considerations, because countries that oughtn't be invaded can be bumped up the list through this spurious mechanism of climate threats.
Yeah. Well, if I can just put my pennyworth into that, Alex, of course, many people look at this and say it's ridiculous and it's nonsense and it's crazy. And I think we have to keep saying it's none of those things. Basically, this is calculated policy in order to achieve an ultimate objective. Capturing the military is the term you've used, but it's also, of course, moving on the agenda towards the new global governance system. But Mike, we've got a NATO task force presumably working on climate change in Eastern Europe.
Well, perhaps, but they seem to be using the entire Royal Navy, if I'm about right. So you can comment on this, Brian. But RT pointing out that Royal Navy sending 5 additional warships to the NATO Maritime Force, and where are they sending? They're sending HMS Iron Duke, which is a Type 23 frigate. They're sending a Type 25 destroyer, which isn't identified, 3 minesweepers, and that's 530 naval personnel. We only have 540 naval personnel these days, isn't that right?
Well, roughly, but of course we got a Type 45 in the foreground, and we've just had reports in the media that these have got power problems. They're getting power outages, so they may be very advanced in some ways, but they're not reliable. So there's a nonsense going on here. And of course, minesweepers have a very important role, but on a strategic scale deployment, this is also nonsense. It's like watching a pantomime, I think, going on.
Well, the ambassador to NATO, this is Sir Adam Thompson, he described it as a more muscular approach to a more muscular approach than it has done since the Cold War to enhance its forward presence in the East and as necessary to the South.
Right.
There you go.
Okay. Well, that's a good bit of newspeak, transformational military change. But the French, of course, are going to be the driving force.
Well, we've been talking about this for quite some time, the merger of French and British forces, and we're hearing rumours about that, including nuclear arsenal. And I just wanted to highlight this article from the International Institute on Strategic Studies from November 2010, where they're pushing exactly that policy, Britain and France as nuclear partners. And they're saying in November 2010, as part of a broad-ranging bilateral defence agreement, the United Kingdom and France signed a treaty providing for limited cooperation on nuclear weapons, modest in scope, and the product in immediate terms of economic pressure. The nuclear treaty's main substantive provision is for the joint construction of a radiographic hydrodynamic facilities. Beneath the surface of this treaty, however, lies a story of significant strategic shifts, and there are intriguing possibilities for the future collaboration between the UK and France, and perhaps for trilateral cooperation involving the United States. Now, I know you've got a few things to say about the past views of the United States of France, but nonetheless, what this is saying, that is part of that dirty deal that was done in May 2010 to bring Britain into this 50-year pact between Britain and France, that in fact our nuclear arsenal may have been part of that to some degree. And I think there seem to be moves to move that forward now.
Well, Mike, the UK column, we've written a number of articles from many years ago saying that the objective was for the French to take over Britain's nuclear deterrent, Britain to be stripped of an independent nuclear deterrent, and that power, the power of nuclear weapons, to be within Europe, principally by the French, but also by the Germans. And we're now seeing the truth starting to come to the surface. So David Cameron, Blair and Brown, of course, previously, but David Cameron utterly lying to the nation about what the true agenda is. It's to hand Britain's military to Europe, and we are to be stripped of independent nuclear deterrent. Alex, I'm sure you've got something to say on this one.
Yes, Britain and France cannot be strategic nuclear partners because since the very early 1960s, we do not have the same arsenal as the French have. They still have their ICBMs, land-based ones, in the Massif Central. And de Gaulle took a deliberate decision after being advised it would take 5 more years and cost billions of francs more than cooperating with the US. He decided that no, France was going to be in NATO but not of it and design its own ICBMs. So if we pool our weapons, French ICBMs are never going to be moved out of their silos in the Massif Central, and we don't even have any RAF bombs anymore. All we have is the subs. The only way of pooling these resources is by moving British subs, perhaps prompted by Scottish independence shenanigans, out of Britain altogether to a shared base at Brest. Can you see any other way of pooling the resources when we stop talking woolly language and start talking about the actual nuclear assets that both countries has?
Well, of course, this is the whole thing, that the French force de frappe can't be moved. So what we're going to do is dismantle Trident, and hey presto, the French are being given control of our nuclear deterrent. Just a bit of hypocrisy here. Bring in Madeleine Moon. BBC News reporting that she's been whinging, I think is the correct expression, that Labour hasn't been having an open and honest discussion about Trident. She said the policy of Labour is to get rid of Trident. There is no open discussion. So that all sounds good. What she actually said is to say that your position is that you're willing to discuss it, Trident, when clear you're not, is not honest. Well, we'd like to say to Madeleine Moon, isn't it strange that when you said you wanted to discuss the suicides amongst young children in South Wales, you didn't want to discuss it because you refused to answer a single email or telephone call or respond to any articles about the suicides and possible causes. So sheer hypocrisy. Why should we trust this woman on Trident? Well, we shouldn't, but dirty dealing going on in the background. Money is the cause of it, so perhaps we should bring in Mr. Soros on this one.
Yes, Soros is still not a household name to the Americans, and I covered last week that the Dutch are becoming aware that he is behind the drive to integrate Ukraine with the EU. And here we see, if you go to this, again, Washington Times, no one else will cover it. The article is called George Soros Funds Ferguson Protests, for those listening in audio only. And the second half of the headline is that he hopes to spur civil action. That's a polite way of saying he hopes to get people out on the streets. I can't see any other way of interpreting that. So Soros is investing ridiculous amounts of money in racial agitation. He is, in fact, the white counterpart of these sham ministers who go around stirring the racial pot in America.
So open democracy, George Soros fomenting revolution. And if you look at organisations doing strange civil activities, we can very often track them back to Soros-related organisations. But what about this one, teaching Arabic at lunchtime for children?
This one is part of the Feuilleton, which is the pull-out serious features supplement of Germany's leading broadsheet, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. And the headline here is Arabisch als Pflichtfach 1001 Umnachtung. So the idea is that Arabic is going to be made, according to this professor at a minor Hamburg university who's flying the kite for the idea, it's going to be made a compulsory subject at primary school. And he suggests even, this guy, he's called Thomas Strotthotter, rather weird name, Strotte. Mr. Strotthotter has suggested, apparently in his own capacity as Chancellor of Kuhne Logistics University in Hamburg, that in order to be linguistically neutral and to prepare these little darlings for the future Germany, they're going to be taught Arabic as they play in kindergarten, and later on they're going to learn through English, because he says it's a neutral language. It's neither German nor Middle Eastern. If he's saying it out loud, a lot of other German intellectuals, post-national types, are thinking it. But the reactions by readers on the FAZ are quite encouraging. Even the FAZ itself has headers in the headline like idiotic idea, impossible idea to implement. But we have a long history in Britain, too, of these so-called idiotic ideas being floated by one intellectual in a broadsheet, being poo-pooed and then becoming government policy a few years later, don't we?
Drifted in, nudged in. Well, everything we see is ramping up tension and hostility with Russia. And you've picked up on the Baltic Times here saying NATO's in for trouble.
Yes, the Baltic Times is always a good one to go to because Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have very open press cultures. They were repressed horribly by the Soviets, and they don't believe in censorship. And they thought for a while they'd achieved the El Dorado of freedom and prosperity in joining the EU and NATO after 2004, 2005. But they're very disillusioned now, the masses of people in each of these three countries. And so the Baltic Times reports here that NATO would lose, it's citing a report, NATO would lose against Russia in the event of an invasion of the Baltic states. Small wonder, really, because just over the border from Estonia in Pskov, on the map here just behind me, you can actually see it within the borders of, almost within the frame of Estonia. Pskov plays headquarters to a whole army division. Estonia would be flattened. It would take, according to this report, something like 24 to 48 hours to fight their way all the way over to the coastal capitals, Tallinn and Riga. These countries are the size of Yorkshire, something of that nature. Bear in mind when we hear about Article 5 pledges to defend NATO members, that much as I love these countries and what a wonderful history they have standing against the Russians and the Germans, they are, in the case of Estonia, 1 million people. Yes, they'll fight to the death for them on their own accounts, but we would see ridiculous amounts of losses if we had anything to do with them as allies. And in that light, I'm very shocked that European defence ministers, I don't know if it's in an EU or a NATO format, are meeting today, I think in Brussels, to discuss putting ground forces on a permanent stationed basis in the Baltic countries.
Well, of course, I think what we're seeing, particularly from Mr. Cameron and Mr. Fallon at the moment, is pure propaganda. We're ramping up the call for war against Russia, because that is what it is. But in the background, we've got this going on. So we just remind people again, we've got David Cameron scrapping HMS Ocean. So just had a £65 million refit, big ship, commando carrier, important vessel, biggest vessel in the Royal Navy at the moment, but it is going to be scrapped. And this was all done very quietly. It wasn't put in David Cameron's defence review. It was slipped out in the House of Lords by Earl Howe. So David Cameron is absolutely lying to the British public. He's winding up the fear of conflict against Russia. Of course, he's using American troops. It's all to do with the power of America, while David Cameron is destroying Britain's military and handing it to the French. Inset picture is of Cameron on board one of the Trident submarines. So treason in front of our eyes, and the plan is that we have no nuclear deterrent. It's to be handed to the French. So that probably leads us in quite nicely to ISIS.
Yes, America's ISIS war is helping Al-Qaeda is the headline in the Daily Beast. And that might seem quite a shocker of a headline, and you might think, oh, Daily Beast is just stirring the pot. But if you actually go to the briefing linked in this article from the US Department of Defense, you see a full transcript of what the journalist asked Lieutenant General Sean McFarland. One has to say Lieutenant General in the American pronunciation for him, although we would otherwise say Lieutenant. Now, here we are in the middle of this piece. He is asked by someone, what is the actual effect of the US... here we are. It's Nancy Youssef with the Daily Beast, and the question she asks General McFarland is, one of the things we've seen, particularly in Syria, is that the US-led strikes have benefited Al-Nusra Front, an organisation known to Brian and Mike. I'm sure you'll comment in a moment. And so, says the journalist with the Daily Beast, I'm curious if you could give us your assessment of Al-Qaeda's current standing, particularly in Syria. Then she has another paragraph of question. General McFarland replies, yeah, I don't believe that any of the strikes we're doing are benefiting Al-Nusra Front. I mean, that's the last thing that we want to do. Next paragraph. Now, Al-Nusra Front and ISIL/Daesh, he doesn't know what to call it, don't get along. That's his claim. So I guess you could say that to the extent we're weakening Daesh, maybe it benefits Al-Nusra Front. What do you make of that admission by General McFarland, Brian?
Well, I'm going to say I'm slightly bemused because, of course, we haven't got any real definition of who these various groups are. They've got labels and names, but are they different? 1 minute we're supposed to be helping some of them, 1 minute we're not. So I'm going to say on air, I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I think the clue is a certain MP Brooks Newmark. Didn't he go and spend 2 days on the Turkish-Syrian border chumming up al-Nusra?
Well, he did. It was he was with the Syrian Free Army in the first place, but of course he was boasting of their strong links with al-Nusra, and that ultimately led to him apologising to the Syrian Free Army that British bombs and rockets were not raining down on Assad.
So it looks like we have a transatlantic neocon, for want of a better word, agreement that al-Nusra are the right kind of Islamist radicals. Doesn't it seem so?
I would say so, yes. Okay, the black humour's coming in. We better move on here. So we've got Chechen spies infiltrating Islamic State. This is another jab at Moscow, I presume, is it?
It is, because what the West can't stand is that the man who said it, Ramzan Kadyrov, was actually brought over from being a rebel against Russian authority in that first Chechen war of the mid-90s to being now president of the Republic of Chechnya within the Russian Federation and a Putin loyalist. So we get all this dross about his pet tigers and what a strong man he is, and as if Chechnya was ever going to be any different culturally, as if it was any different before him. No, it's always been ruled by men like that. That's their culture. But there he is saying, we are actually, allegedly saying, and he may have been spun, but he's saying we have infiltrated ISIS with Chechen spies who are actually going to report back to Russian special forces, who will then rain in strikes on them. So it's an indication of how complicated this picture is. Chechnya, as a source of rebellion against Russia, was actually provoked by the West. Even that little country of Estonia on that map behind me, one of my favourite countries, actually gave them a head start in their rebellion against Russia, in that Estonian ex-special forces dropped quite a lot of supplies to these Chechens, international terrorists, to use the press phrase. They dropped these supplies out of planes at the beginning of the war, in recognition of the fact that Johar Dudayev, a Chechen by ethnicity, had been the commander of Soviet riot forces in Estonia during the breakup of the USSR and had ordered his men not to open fire and allow them to have a peaceful revolution against the Soviets. So there's all kinds of murky stuff going on, really. In fact, people tend to forget it now, but even back in '94, there was a chap discovered, I think cut up in pieces in the boot of a car in Manchester, who turned out to be a special envoy of this rebel entity of Chechnya when nobody had heard of it. And he was trying to interest British philatelists in rare stamps issued by the new Republic of Chechnya, rebelling against Russia. All these are little indications to me that somebody had a hand in the Chechen rebellion, that it was not an autonomous rebellion, and that to this day a significant part of these Chechen rebels, I think, are actually being funded from the West.
So being funded from the West, at the same time, of course, the fear factors being used to ramp up the European army and European integration. I'll just quickly flash this one on screen. Very interesting article from Liam Fox, who's really hammering the EU, and he says it's time to end the spectacle of a British Prime Minister with a begging bowl. There's only one answer to give: take control, vote leave. So that's pretty in your face from Liam Fox. Not sure what his agenda is. But you've got a number of comments here on other things going on to do with EU reform.
Yes, it's a good idea to plug individual tweeters who are asking the right questions. And here down in the southwest, very near you, is a tweeter called Cornish View. That's his Twitter handle, or hers, I think it's a he. And he has retweeted via Roger Helmer of UKIP the fact that Barroso, the former president of the European Commission, has said you can do what you like with reforming the EU. It will not deter migrants on their way to Britain. How does Barroso know this? And Cornish View has correctly noted here that Barroso used to belong to the Maoist movement. So he may still have radical Marxist Maoist ideas. There's no indication that he's actually lost them, I think. So is this a veiled threat? Is he saying that he has inside knowledge that waves of people are going to be thrown at the cliffs of Dover, whatever we do with the EU?
Well, I think we've had a few Maoists in power in Westminster, but what about the Lords EU Select Committee?
Yes, here we have in the middle there, the lady is of my profession. She's a conference interpreter, and she is interpreting for the gentleman to her left and right. These are German MPs, one representing each of the old Deadwood political parties, Detlef Seif and Axel Schäfer. They've both had European Parliament experience. And I listened live yesterday afternoon because it's very rare to have continental MPs turn up in committee rooms. It does happen sometimes, and you have the Mayor of Calais appearing to the Commons Home Affairs Committee, but now it's the Lords EU Committee yesterday afternoon. And one of them, I think it was Mr. Saif, said, we have a bit of a problem here because you invited us to talk about the spectrum of German political views on the forthcoming UK referendum on the EU. And he said, our problem is that with 650 people in the Bundestag, the German parliament, we could not find one who believed that the UK would be better off leaving the European Union. Now, I don't think he's lying. I think he's saying that the German establishment is such a closed shop that there are, out of our 650 MPs, and some of them actually represent fringe parties, not just the CDU and the Socialists, not one of these MPs could be prepared to say, I believe that Britain should exercise its national sovereignty. And during the course of their exchanges, Saif and Schaefer actually said, in terms, our problem is that you in Britain put sovereignty first, historically at least, and we in Germany decided, or had it imposed upon us in 48-49 when we wrote our new constitution, that we would never again go to war with anyone, and therefore the German constitution forces us not to put national sovereignty first. Now, that's a very frank admission of why we can't mix the UK and the continent. It's chalk and cheese.
Okay, right. Well, before we finish on matters financial, just give us a brief comment on this issue with, I think this is to do with Poland, transition reversible.
Yes, the Legatum Institute, a Latin name, it means either a legate or a tie or a bond. Legatum Institute is asking this rather waspish question: is transition reversible? ? The case of Central Europe. And this chap, Anton Chekhovtsov, a Russian writing for the Legatum Institute, is basically saying, nasty Poland, nasty Hungary, how dare they put, again, what we were talking about, how dare they put the national interest first? How dare they still believe in sovereignty now that they've joined the EU project? I'd be very interested if any viewers can find out where the Legatum Institute gets its funding from. I've got a fair suspicion that their main funder may be a gentleman whose surname begins and ends with the letter S.
I'm going to guess Mr. Soros. We'll do some work on that for you. Okay, Alex, thank you very much for your analysis as always. Mike, just let's end with a look at what's happening with the international banks. And of course, many of these organisations are funding the drive for yet more war.
Well, hot on the heels of Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse has had to make a similar statement. If you remember, Deutsche Bank had to tell us that everything was all right yesterday or the day before. So their statement is quite similar to Deutsche Bank's, with their chief executive saying everything's all right, it's all okay, honest gov. And Credit Suisse now worth 20% less than it was a week ago on the stock market, and 50% less than it was back in July when the new chief executive took over. He said the banking system in general is much stronger than in 2008, 2009, but there are a lot of memories of that period. Some of the scenes we're seeing today are not justified. That's what he was whining about. Banks are smaller, apparently. They're deleveraged, apparently. They are less risky, apparently, and they're better capitalized. So he's clearly, like many bankers, quite willing to lie through his teeth. But in the meantime, UBS also in trouble, and they've decided that they need to put a halt on any salary rises this year. They have 5,200 people working in their investment bank division, and they had expected pay increases, and well, they're not going to get them. So similar to several other banks in the same sort of peer group, they've been hit by what are being described as trading conditions which are treacherous. Well, Alex, there's no need to panic though, is there?
Well, the British press, mainstream press, is not telling us anything about this as far as I can see. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't see everything over here. But I see that the Parisian Stock Exchange, the CAC, is approaching that psychologically crucial 4,000 points. And as well as being on the website of Les Echos, the French business paper, this was emailed through to subscribers, including me, with a French tongue-in-cheek remark: it's not quite time to panic yet.
Okay, we'll get ready to panic. Well, no, we won't, because we're going to stay calm on this issue, because what the government wants is fear and panic and confusion at every level. I think we're going to say what we all need to do is cold, calculated analysis.
Yes, and it would help if we actually had a forum in the mainstream press to talk about these things. People have heard of websites like zerohedge.com. Mike uses a plethora of sources, having worked in finance before, to get his information. But perhaps Mike can just chip in with a pointer to where people can get this analysis.
No, it's a bit tricky, Alex, because there are a lot of different sources, but it's either so dumbed down as to be useless or rather technical, which most people won't be interested in. So it's difficult to get. It is actually difficult to get a sort of middle ground there.
I think we'll say the UK column will continue to do its best to provide a middle of the road analysis. Well, we've squeezed in, or we've gained a little bit of time, so we're just squeezing another subject. You've got the Pete Zwart Institute here, which I think is going to lead us on to liquid logic.
Yes, I looked into liquid logic when you featured it yesterday, Brian, and you said, what on earth is this? I hadn't heard of it either, really. I think vaguely once. And as usual, the Dutch come up trumps, because when they hear something, they talk about it openly, because they don't realise that in the English-speaking world, you're supposed to keep things secret. So bless them, they shout it from the rooftops. And here we have the Pete Zwart Institute. They seem to be into contemporary art and education and all kinds of things, saying in the first paragraph, if you just Google Pete Zwart, you'll find it. Here we are, thank you. They say in the first paragraph, since the 19th century, the political and artistic avant-gardes have been thinking about the role of art in education in relation to, here comes the crunch, societal circumstances and change, predominantly with the goal of emancipation. That's another word for Marxist liberation and revolution. And at the end of the paragraph, you read the lectures and seminars are constructed around the idea of liquid logic, which is defined as a more open, networked and fluid way of approaching the otherwise structured and compartmentalized educational models.
Wow.
Logic it ain't.
Well, I'd honestly get a creepy feeling from seeing that on screen, because you get the impression of persons unknown collaborating in order to bring in this change agenda. And for anybody who didn't pick up on our comment yesterday about liquid logic, this was picked up as part of Liverpool City Council's MAPPA, multi-agency public protection arrangement, and their MASH cells, which is a huge network of people spying on the public, people supposedly who need help, but liquid logic was the database. Well, as a result of that article, we got this in from an informed viewer, in fact, somebody who's very closely connected with the DWP, and they said the Department of Work and Pensions is a partner to the team you mentioned. This is the MAPPA MASH cells, and all frontline staff have a procedure to follow for referral to that said team if someone's deemed suicidal or at risk. Mental health training and NLP courses are currently being offered. All the financial information regarding income and assets is gathered and shared with the multi-agencies. I think the sanction-driven agenda will help put the general public under sufficient stress. In a nutshell, what the person is saying there is that we talked about social services, housing, the NHS, but you should also include DWP. And if you get caught up in that network, all of your financial information, etc., will be revealed amongst all those networked agencies, and the database system they're using is Liquid Logic. Alex, I've got to be tough here. 30 seconds on your book, and we must end today's news.
This double bill, they're both available as PDFs, but Tragedy and Hope, which is Carol Quigley's definitive work, is better ordered as a cheap ebook via Amazon Kindle or others, whereas the other one, The Anglo-American Establishment, is only available as a PDF, but it is free and it's easily readable, including on devices, because it's big type. The point about this is we get a lot of flack from people saying, stop going on about Nazi plots. Point taken. The Nazis aren't around anymore, at least not openly. They might not have done everything they're claimed to have done. And in order to balance the picture, I would urge people to read this genuine conspiracy, which called itself a conspiracy, which started in late 19th century London and eventually spread out to encompass Washington, New York, and the rape and pillage of southern Africa.
Okay, well, we're always encouraging people to do their own research, and books such as this, very important to beginning to build the picture. I'll simply add to that whatever the global conspiracy is, the real danger is what is taking place at a local level. It will be your local NHS that comes with the psychiatric team. It will be your local police. So if you want to stop what's happening, we've got to be prepared to expose it and block it at a local level. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. I hope the sun has now appeared in the lowlands of Holland. We look forward to having you back again. Thank everybody else for joining us today. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.